Princess Diana's final warning, hidden for years, has just surfaced, exposing a chilling prediction about Camilla's rise to power that no one ever expected. In a letter, recently revealed after decades of secrecy, Princess Diana shares her haunting foresight about Camilla, claiming that despite promises made by Charles, Camilla would one day wear the crown. This explosive document reveals shocking truths about the royal family, leaving us to question how much Diana really knew. Why was this letter kept hidden for so long, and what does it mean for the future of the monarchy? Stay with us as we uncover the scandalous secrets that Diana saw coming all along. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the world changed. No fireworks, no royal proclamation, just an envelope. Yellowed with time, its edges frayed, its ink slightly faded. But the words inside? Explosive. Unforgiving. Prescient. The kind of words that could tear through Buckingham Palace like a storm through glass. The envelope, addressed in elegant handwriting to HRH the Princess Royal, had been locked away, buried in a private vault, forgotten, or perhaps intentionally silenced. Inside was a letter from Princess Diana. And not just any letter. A final warning. A whispered prophecy. A sisterly confession written with urgency, sorrow, and piercing clarity. In it, Diana, once dubbed the People's Princess, a title she wore with more honor than her crown, left behind what many now call the final piece of the puzzle, a bold prediction that Camilla Parker Bowles would one day wear the crown as queen consort. No matter what promises Charles had made. Mark my words, and she wrote, one day she will wear the crown, no matter what Charles swore to me. Those words now echo like thunder through the marble halls of the monarchy, and the fallout is just beginning. But how did we get here? How could a single letter, hidden for nearly 3 decades, ignite such chaos? And more importantly, what else does it reveal about Diana's inner world, her distrust of the royal institution, her shattered marriage, and the woman she believed would haunt the throne? Today, we are pulling back the curtain. Not on just a love triangle, not just on royal betrayal, but on a carefully guarded truth, long buried beneath layers of royal protocol, PR polish, and silence. This isn't just about a letter. This is about legacy. About a woman who, even in her most private moments, spoke of things too dangerous for the tabloids to print. A woman who, through pain, still sought to protect her sons, warn her sister, and, perhaps without even realizing it, shaped the very future of the monarchy. But before we dive into the letter itself, before we dissect every shocking sentence and predict the political aftershocks, let's take a step back. Let's return to a time of whispered scandals, awkward photo ops, and strained smiles. To a time when Diana was still alive, still fighting for her dignity, and still living in the shadow of Camilla. Let's revisit the closing years of a royal marriage that was never truly a union, but rather a palace-shaped battlefield, where tradition clashed with emotion, where vows crumbled under the weight of expectation, and where Diana often stood alone, watching as the institution she married into tried to smother the very spirit that made her adored. The letter to Princess, and, as it turns out, wasn't just a personal note. It was a verdict, a testimony, a living document of grief, foresight, and fire, meant not for the public, but for the only other woman in the royal family who might understand. Why and why now? And why was this letter never spoken of before? The answers to these questions lie in a tale full of power plays, sisterhood, manipulation, and betrayal. But more than that, they lie in the life of a woman who, even in death, refuses to be silenced. Because make no mistake, this story isn't ancient history. It's a lit fuse. And the monarchy? It may already be burning. Let's begin. It's the summer of 1995. The air inside Kensington Palace is heavy, emotionally suffocating, the way a room feels just before a storm. Diana has just returned from another tumultuous trip abroad, her smile fixed for cameras, her charity work praised in the press. But behind palace doors, things are unraveling. The distance between her and Prince Charles has become impossible to hide. Their separate lives, though still dressed in royal titles and ceremony, no longer pretend to touch. Every tabloid headline seems to drip with speculation, betrayal, and innuendo. Diana is being followed, photographed, and publicly picked apart. But in private, she's preparing something else. Something quiet. Something no one would expect. She's writing to her sister, Princess, and not because they were known to be exceptionally close, not in public, at least, Their relationship was complicated, often cold in the eyes of outsiders. But, and for all her tough exterior, shared something very few in the family did. She had also married outside the fold, had also fought for her independence, and she too bore the scars of royal duty. If there was anyone Diana could confide in without facing judgment or leaks, it was in. And so she wrote. The letter itself, according to sources close to the family, was handwritten on heavy cream stationery. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. It was direct, emotional, and prophetic. The kind of message that was never meant for the public, but which now threatens to rewire everything we thought we knew. In that moment, Diana wasn't writing as the Princess of Wales. She was writing as a sister, a mother, a woman betrayed. The content, only recently revealed by those who came across the letter in a private collection belonging to a former palace staffer, sends chills even now. Diana didn't just express doubt about Camilla, she predicted her coronation. She didn't just mourn her own marriage, she documented how Charles's affections had been transferred long before the wedding bells even stopped echoing. She didn't just fear for her sons, she foresaw a future where one of them might rule beside a stepmother she could never accept. Why this matters now, in 2025, is more than just about scandal. It's about memory, about rewriting, or perhaps correcting, the narrative we've been fed for decades. Charles and Camilla's story has been repackaged as a love that endured, a misunderstood romance given new life through time and patience. But this letter disrupts that fairy tale. It challenges the version where Diana was simply too emotional, too difficult, or too sensitive. It reframes her not as the unstable ex-wife, but as the only one who truly saw what was coming. More importantly, it places Princess and one of the monarchy's most quietly powerful players at the center of a moral dilemma. She has held on to this letter for decades, protected it, maybe even struggled with it. And now that it's out, the questions swirl. Did she try to warn the family? Did she try to confront Charles? Or was she simply honoring Diana's wish that it remain private? The palace, of course, has refused to comment, as they often do when the ghosts of Diana return to haunt their halls. But silence speaks, doesn't it? And this silence is deafening. In the coming segments, we will break this letter down line by line. We will examine the relationship between Charles, Camilla, and Diana with a lens sharper than ever before. We will hear from royal historians, former palace staff, and those who have dared to speak out when everyone else kept quiet. We will travel through time. From Diana's earliest doubts to Camilla's quiet coronation, to see how much of this future Diana predicted and how much the palace tried to erase. Because the truth has a habit of surfacing, and sometimes it doesn't arrive with a bang, but with ink on paper, a sister's sorrow, and a promise that, one day, the world would know. And now we do. From the outside looking in, the royal family has always functioned like a finely tuned watch. Every movement precise, every emotion tucked neatly behind protocol. And within that gilded mechanism, Princess Diana and Princess and seemed like opposites. One, a radiant media darling whose smile could light up a room. The other, a stoic royalist known for her unflinching loyalty to duty and her distaste for theatrics. But behind palace walls, away from the public's lens, lived a more complex truth. There existed between the two women a bond that, while never flashy or overly affectionate, was forged in mutual understanding, shared burdens, and the quiet pain of women born into or married into a life that wasn't truly their own. To understand the gravity of Diana's letter, we must first understand the rarely explored relationship between her and Anne. These were two women who carried the monarchy in very different ways, but with similarly deep emotional scars. Their connection was never publicly celebrated, never photographed in the way Diana and Fergie's was. But perhaps that's what made it more real. Their interactions weren't tabloid fodder. They were private, coded, often tense, but rooted in something much deeper than casual royal camaraderie, survival. Princess Anne was the first of her generation to navigate marriage in the fishbowl of royal life. Long before Diana ever walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral, and had already seen what love inside the palace could become, dissected, diminished, and sometimes destroyed by duty. Her own marriage to Captain Mark Phillips had its fractures from the beginning. While Anne was fiercely independent and grounded, Mark was more reserved and ultimately distanced himself from the spotlight. The two were plagued by infidelity rumors and long stretches of emotional detachment, culminating in their eventual separation and divorce in the early 1990s. Diana, younger by 9 years, watched it all unfold. By the time she joined the royal family in 1981 and had already become a seasoned player in a game, Diana was just learning the rules too. While the public was enamored by Diana's fairy tale image, it wasn't who offered her an unfiltered look at the reality behind the crown. According to royal staff and former courtiers, and wasn't always warm to Diana. She could be cutting, pragmatic, even cold. But she was also honest, sometimes brutally so. She didn't coddle, and she didn't pretend. And that, strangely, was something Diana came to value. Because in a world full of courtiers who smiled to her face and whispered behind her back, Anne's brutal sincerity became a kind of anchor. Sources close to the family have said that in moments of vulnerability, especially during the breakdown of Diana's marriage, Anne was one of the few members of the firm who didn't pity her. Instead, she listened. She offered perspective, not platitudes. When Diana cried over Charles's emotional abandonment or his continued entanglement with Camilla, Anne didn't tell her to keep calm and carry on. She told her the truth, that this was how the royal system worked, that emotional fulfillment had never been a guarantee, and that sometimes, surviving it meant accepting things no one else would dare speak aloud. It was during one of these moments, according to a former palace staffer who worked at both St. James's Palace and Kensington, that Diana first confided in and about her suspicions of Charles's secret plans for Camilla. Diana feared that the relationship between Charles and Camilla had evolved beyond emotional dependence and was slowly being rehabilitated behind closed doors. She believed that palace aides and certain family members were complicit in creating a path that would eventually legitimize Camilla in the public eye, and reportedly didn't disagree. That admission alone was enough to forge an unspoken pact between the sisters-in-law. While they may not have exchanged hugs or called each other in tears, there was an understanding. They were both women who had been shaped and scarred by their roles in the monarchy. They were both navigating a world that valued tradition over truth and image over emotion. It's important to remember that Anne, too, had once been the tabloid target. In the early 1980s, her own extramarital affair with naval officer Timothy Lawrence, now her second husband, made headlines when stolen love letters between them were published in the press. It was a scandal that rocked the palace and made Anne one of the earliest modern royals to face a full-blown media firestorm over personal matters. So when Diana's own life began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny, Anne was already familiar with that terrain. She knew how quickly the institution could turn on one of its own. She understood the brutal rhythm of scandal, denial, spin, silence. And while she may not have always liked Diana's emotional vulnerability or her reliance on the media for vindication, she respected her strength in choosing not to be silent. The letter Diana would eventually write to, and wasn't just born out of sisterly concern. It was a passing of the torch, a confession, a desperate hope that if anything ever happened to her, if she was silenced, cast out, or worse, someone would know the truth. Someone within the system. Someone who wouldn't just bury it or deny it ever existed. And was that someone? And it's telling that Diana didn't entrust this truth to her own mother, Frances Shand Kidd, nor to her brother, Charles Spencer. As close as she was to them in different ways, both were ultimately outsiders to the royal machine. And, on the other hand, lived and breathed it. She understood the codes, the quiet rules, the politics. She knew what it meant to stand beside a brother who broke his vows and publicly remarried the woman who had, for all intents and purposes, destroyed his first marriage. That decision to write and was strategic, but also deeply personal. Even now, with the letter finally seeing the light of day, Anne has refused to comment publicly. As is her way, she remains loyal to the code of royal discretion, even as the contents of Diana's message ripple across every media outlet in the world. But the silence is loud, and in it, we can imagine the weight she carries. Because to read that letter, not as a public figure, but as a sister, is to relive every warning, every fear, every emotional bruise Diana tried to document before her death. It is to acknowledge that perhaps the institution did exactly what Diana said it would. It lifted Camilla to the crown, not by fate, but by carefully orchestrated maneuvering. And now, Anne is left standing as the only living royal who received that final truth directly. What must that feel like? To be the keeper of a truth you can never speak. To watch the world spin a new narrative, polished, comfortable, controlled, knowing the one you were told in private is far messier. To see your sister-in-law's predictions come true, one painful detail at a time, and realize that history is being rewritten in real time and not in her favor. As we move into the next chapter, we will unpack the contents of that letter in full. We'll explore not just what Diana wrote, but why those words have rattled the monarchy to its core. Because the letter didn't just expose the personal, it exposed the political. It exposed the mechanics of power and how far the royal family might go to preserve it. But it began here, with two women. One who could see the future with terrifying clarity, and one who was asked to hold on to that vision long after the world believed it had been buried. And now, it has come roaring back. The letter arrived without a sound. No grand ceremony. No entourage. Just a quiet delivery into a trusted royal hand. It was never meant to be public, never intended for the scrutiny of headlines or dissection by the masses. But that has changed. Now, the words once sealed in privacy are being read across breakfast tables and broadcasted into millions of homes. Princess Diana's letter to Princess Anne, long hidden from the public, has emerged as one of the most damning personal documents to ever surface from within the British royal family. And at the center of this letter lies a chilling sentence that has become both a headline and a haunting prophecy. Mark my words, and one day she will wear the crown, no matter what Charles swore to me. That line, written in Diana's unmistakable script, has broken through decades of royal silence. It is not a vague sentiment. It is not speculation. It is a clear, forceful statement, a prediction, a warning, and a revelation all at once. In those 15 words, Diana captures what she believed to be the inevitable, that no matter what promises had been made in the privacy of their failing marriage, Camilla Parker Bowles would not only return, but ascend. The letter is estimated to have been written in early 1996, mere months before Diana's official divorce from Prince Charles. By then, Diana was no longer playing the role of the obedient wife. She was navigating a minefield of betrayal, royal pressure, public disillusionment, and the looming threat of complete isolation from the institution she had once been paraded through with pomp and pageantry. This letter, written in ink that has outlasted the reputations of many involved, reflects her mindset with raw precision. Let's begin with the physicality of the letter. According to sources familiar with its discovery, it was handwritten on thick, cream-colored royal stationery. Diana's handwriting, elegant and expressive, fills the page with urgency. There are underlined words, sharp pauses, a rhythm to the writing that reveals her emotional state, rising tension, followed by moments of clarity and calm, then another sharp burst of sentiment. But what truly elevates the letter from personal musing to historical artifact is its content. It does more than express frustration. It dismantles a facade. Diana opens the letter with an affectionate tone toward Anne, something rare for a royal who typically kept her emotions tightly controlled in family matters. She acknowledges that Anne has always been one of the few family members willing to speak plainly and directly, even when it was uncomfortable. Diana thanks her for that, before diving into the purpose of the letter, to unburden herself of what she calls a gnawing truth that has haunted her for years. She writes that Charles's relationship with Camilla never ended. Not during the courtship. Not during the honeymoon. Not even when William and Harry were born. According to Diana, Camilla was a constant, a hidden presence who hovered in the shadows of every major royal moment. She describes how Charles, despite public declarations to the contrary, maintained not just emotional but physical intimacy with Camilla throughout much of their marriage. The language is clinical at times, yet painfully emotional. Diana doesn't just blame Charles, she blames the system that enabled him. She accuses palace aides of shielding the affair, of discouraging her from speaking out, of painting her as irrational when she dared to ask questions or express heartbreak. She calls it gaslighting under the weight of a crown. It is a rare instance of Diana confronting the monarchy not just as a family but as a machinery, an entity designed to protect its image at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing truth, fairness, or the mental health of its members. Then she turns her attention to Camilla. Diana's words become sharper, more decisive. She calls Camilla dangerously patient, describing her as someone who knew how to wait out the storm. She doesn't need a stage, Diana writes, because the palace will build it for her when the time is right. It's a chilling assessment, not of Camilla as a rival, but as a calculated force who understood the inner workings of the monarchy better than anyone else. The letter outlines Diana's belief that Camilla was slowly being repositioned in the public eye, even during Diana's most turbulent moments. She writes that while she was being labeled unstable and needy by the press and royal insiders, Camilla was being rehabilitated. Carefully, quietly. Strategically, Diana believed this wasn't an accident, it was a plan, one that would culminate in Camilla becoming queen consort. What makes this all the more disturbing is that Diana says Charles once swore to her that this would never happen. According to the letter, he promised in a moment of rare honesty, that Camilla would never bear a title higher than companion, that she would never be crowned, never be accepted fully into the royal fold. Diana refers to it as a sacred vow made in the aftermath of their most heated arguments. But she didn't believe him. In fact, she says she knew then, and writes to, and now, that the promise would be broken, that Charles would do what he had always done, prioritize image over integrity, and that the palace, loyal not to morality but to legacy, would back him. This foresight is what makes the letter so powerful. Diana wasn't just venting. She was predicting the future. A future that, 2 decades later, has unfolded exactly as she said it would. In 2005, Charles and Camilla married. At the time, the palace announced that Camilla would take the title princess consort. When Charles became king, a concession, many believed, to Diana's memory and the public's lingering resentment. But as time passed, that language began to shift. Public opinion softened. Camilla's charity work was emphasized. Her image became more grandmotherly, more palatable. The title of queen consort began to reappear in official documents. And then, in 2022, Queen Elizabeth II herself gave her blessing for Camilla to be known as queen consort upon Charles's accession. It was the final stamp of approval. The quiet maneuvering Diana feared had been completed. Camilla's coronation, once unthinkable, was now inevitable. Back in the letter, Diana closes with a line that is perhaps the most gut-wrenching of all. "I only hope," she writes, "that when the truth comes out, it won't be too late for my boys." It is a mother's plea, written not with vengeance but with grief. Diana knew that her sons would grow up in a world shaped by lies they weren't old enough to question. She feared they would be told a version of events that erased her pain, silenced her truth, and honored those who had betrayed her. She feared they would one day see Camilla not as the woman who helped destroy their parents' marriage, but as their father's rightful queen. And now, in 2025, that fear feels less like paranoia and more like prophecy. We do not know if William and Harry have seen the letter. We do not know if Anne ever spoke of it to them, or to Charles. But what we do know is this: the words exist. They are real. And they now exist outside the walls of the palace, beyond the reach of royal press secretaries and damage control. The truth Diana tried to warn about can no longer be hidden. What happens next will be shaped by how the monarchy responds, by how the public reacts, and by whether those who still carry Diana's legacy, especially her sons, choose to confront the truth she left behind. Because the past isn't dead. It was just buried. And now, Diana's words have brought it roaring back to life. It's easy, in retrospect, to see Diana's royal marriage through a simplistic lens. The fairy tale wedding, the gowns, the headlines, the scandal. But to understand the gravity of her letter to Princess and why it carried the emotional weight it did, one must understand the environment that produced it, a marriage built not on love, but on illusion. A union conceived under the blinding light of expectation, constructed with pageantry, and held together, for a time, by the crushing pressure of royal image. From the moment Lady Diana Spencer first appeared in the public eye as Prince Charles's romantic interest, she was thrust into a spotlight so bright it stripped away nuance. She was the virgin bride, the shy, demure schoolteacher, the doe-eyed savior of the monarchy's image. But behind the carefully staged photos and rehearsed smiles, a much darker story was already being written, one of betrayal, loneliness, and secrets. The truth is, Charles's heart was never hers to begin with. Long before the engagement, long before the 1981 wedding that captivated a global audience of nearly 750 million, his affections were already tied to another woman, Camilla Parker Bowles. By the time Diana entered the royal picture, Camilla and Charles had shared a bond for years. And though Camilla was married to another man, Andrew Parker Bowles, her emotional connection to Charles never truly ended. Diana, as she would later admit in interviews and letters, sensed this from the start. During their engagement, she famously found a bracelet Charles had ordered for Camilla, engraved with the initials F and G, standing for their nicknames for one another, Fred and Gladys. The gift shattered whatever illusions she still had about her fiancé's devotion. She was only 19. Charles was 32. And already, the cracks in the foundation of their relationship were impossible to ignore. But walking away wasn't an option. Not in a monarchy that had already spun the perfect story. Not with the global press watching. Not with the Queen and her advisors urging calm and continuity. Diana once said in a recorded conversation, "I can't marry him. It's all wrong." But those words never left the confines of the palace walls. The wedding went ahead. The dress was sewn. The world cheered. And so began a marriage that was, in many ways, over before it began. What followed were years of emotional deprivation. Diana's early months as Princess of Wales were defined by intense public scrutiny and almost no private support. The palace, steeped in tradition, expected her to adapt. But no one taught her how to navigate a husband whose heart belonged elsewhere. No one warned her about the ruthless press. No one helped her find her voice in a family that preferred silence. Charles, meanwhile, returned to old habits. While he and Diana made public appearances, posed for photographs, and traveled on royal tours, his private communication with Camilla never ceased. Phone calls, letters, private meetings. He leaned on her for comfort, for counsel, for emotional grounding. And Diana, isolated and overwhelmed, was left with cameras in her face and whispers behind her back. One moment captures the pain perfectly. During their 1983 tour of Australia, Diana dazzled crowds. Her beauty, grace, and ease with children captured hearts instantly. But behind the scenes, she was unraveling. Pregnant, exhausted, and under pressure, she began to feel the weight of her role crush her spirit. Later, she described walking into a room where Charles and his team were discussing Camilla. Her name was never mentioned outright, but Diana knew. She always knew. By 1986, Charles had resumed his full affair with Camilla. That same year, Diana began her own extramarital involvement with James Hewitt, a cavalry officer. But unlike Charles's rekindled romance, Diana's was born from emotional starvation. She wasn't seeking thrill, she was seeking comfort, affirmation, the feeling of being seen. The emotional chasm between them widened with every passing year. And it was during this period that Diana began to document her experiences. Through secret tapes recorded for author Andrew Morton, through handwritten letters, and through private conversations with trusted allies, she began to tell the truth she could not speak aloud. Those tapes formed the backbone of Diana, her true story, a book that shattered the image of the perfect royal marriage. But the world wasn't ready for the full truth. What Diana said then was only the beginning. Her letter to In, now exposed, is the continuation of that confession, a record not just of a failing marriage, but of a rigged system. She describes, in that letter, the way palace aides would shield Charles. How her concerns about his infidelity were dismissed as hysteria. How Camilla was never kept at a distance, but rather managed behind closed doors. One section, reportedly, reads, "I wasn't battling one woman. I was battling an entire institution that believed she belonged there more than I did." That sentence alone lays bare the agony Diana endured. This wasn't just a romantic betrayal. It was institutional erasure. She, the wife and mother of the heir to the throne, was made to feel like the outsider, the disruptor, the problem. And yet, she stayed. Not because she loved the life, but because she loved her sons. Diana once said that if not for William and Harry, she would have fled long ago. Her every move inside the palace was made with them in mind. Her public appearances, her relentless charity work, her graceful endurance in the face of humiliation, it was all for them. But even that had its limits. By the early 1990s, the marriage was unsalvageable. The separation was announced in 1992. The divorce finalized in 1996. But Diana's letter to In suggests that even in legal freedom, she knew the story wasn't over. Because while she was retreating from royal life, Camilla was moving in. Quietly. Strategically. Without fanfare, but with full support from key insiders. And Charles? He no longer hid his intentions. The promise he had once made, that Camilla would never be queen, began to fade from memory. Diana, hurt and disillusioned, wrote to, and not just as a sister-in-law, but as a witness. A woman saying, "This is what's happening. You know it. I know it. One day, the world will know it too." That day, as it turns out, is now. We remember Diana for her compassion, her elegance, her ability to connect with those the monarchy often overlooked. But what we're rediscovering now is something even more powerful, her clarity, her ability to see through the facade, her willingness to document what she knew the palace would deny. Her pain was not private. It was painted on the walls of Kensington Palace, echoed in the hallways of Balmoral, whispered about in the corridors of Clarence House. And now, preserved in her own words, it speaks again. This was never just a marriage gone wrong. It was a warning, wrapped in silence. Promises made in private are often the most dangerous kind. They carry no witnesses, no paperwork, no titles, no seals. Just words, spoken in quiet moments, often meant to soothe the immediate pain of the person hearing them, not to shape the course of the future. That was the nature of the promises Prince Charles made to Diana. Whispered reassurances in the middle of marital breakdowns, small concessions made after arguments, vague words of honor offered during fragile truces. And among them, according to Diana's private letters and confidences, was one particularly devastating vow, that Camilla Parker Bowles would never become queen. To understand how deep this promise went, and why its breach still echoes painfully today, we must revisit the many moments where Diana clung to the hope that, if nothing else, Charles would at least protect her dignity. Not by loving her more, not by saving their marriage, but by preventing the woman who had haunted that marriage from wearing the crown that should have, by all tradition, been Diana's. Diana once described Charles's words to her as a gentle oath, not spoken formally or under any pressure, but in the vulnerability of their shared collapse. After an argument about Camilla's presence in their lives, Diana reportedly demanded answers. According to sources close to her, including former butler Paul Burrell and biographer Andrew Morton, Charles promised that no matter what happened between them, Camilla would never be publicly elevated. She would never be queen. That was, Diana believed, the line he would not cross. At the time, this promise felt like the last thread of dignity Diana had left to hold on to. It wasn't love. It wasn't even loyalty. But it was something. It was Charles acknowledging that Camilla's role in their lives was a wound so deep that allowing her to ascend would be an admission of betrayal so bold, it would dishonor Diana entirely. And yet, here we are. In the years after Diana's death, Charles and Camilla's relationship transformed from an illicit affair into a carefully managed public partnership. At first, there was caution. Camilla was kept out of the spotlight. Public opinion was still bruised by Diana's tragic passing and the widespread perception that Camilla had played a central role in her unhappiness. Even the Queen reportedly refused to meet Camilla for years, and the royal family avoided joint public appearances that might suggest acceptance. When Charles and Camilla married in 2005, the palace made a very specific announcement. Camilla would be titled Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Cornwall and not Princess of Wales, a title still emotionally tethered to Diana. Furthermore, it was stated that when Charles became king, Camilla would not be queen consort, but rather princess consort, a title invented for the purpose of appeasing public sentiment. That, in theory, upheld Charles's promise. On paper, at least, Camilla would never wear the crown. But words, as Diana knew too well, are not always binding. Titles can be changed. Announcements can be walked back. Public memory fades. And so, slowly, incrementally, that promise began to unravel. Over the years, the palace began to refer to Camilla in warmer, more reverent tones. Her charity work was highlighted. Her appearances with Charles became more frequent. Media campaigns emphasized her humor, loyalty, and supportiveness. Bit by bit, the image of Camilla the villain began to shift. Until she was seen less as a disruptor and more as a partner, a constant presence who had helped Charles weather the storms of royal life. The final undoing of Charles's promise came in February 2022, during Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. In a carefully worded message, the Queen said it was her sincere wish that Camilla would be known as Queen Consort when Charles took the throne. That single sentence marked the end of all hedging. The title of Princess Consort was gone. The crown, in all its ceremony and tradition, was being placed within Camilla's reach. It was not Charles who made the announcement. It was the Queen. But make no mistake, it happened with his blessing. And in doing so, the promise Charles once made to Diana died. Some royal watchers say that Charles never had any intention of keeping that vow. That it was made in a moment of desperation, an attempt to pacify Diana during one of their many explosive arguments. That he had no legal or political obligation to uphold it. But others, particularly those who still remember Diana's words and pain, see it differently. For them, it wasn't just a broken promise. It was a betrayal of trust, one that Diana carried to her grave. A betrayal that, through the leak of her letter to Anne, is now being publicly laid bare. The line, "Mark my words," and "One day she will wear the crown, no matter what Charles swore to me," is not just an accusation. It is Diana reminding us that she knew this would happen. that she saw through the layers of polite lies and empty vows, that she understood, even then, that when it came to preserving his image and his desires, Charles would always choose Camilla, and that the institution would follow suit. What makes this even more devastating is the way it reframes the official royal narrative. For years, the story has been retold in softer tones. Charles and Camilla, kept apart by outdated rules. Diana, tragically caught in the middle. The monarchy, slowly evolving. But the letter doesn't echo that version. It paints a starker reality, one where power, not love, was the central motivator. One where promises were never meant to be kept, just delayed until the public had moved on. Diana wrote that letter not because she was obsessed or jealous. She wrote it because she saw what was coming. She knew that unless someone within the family remembered the truth, history would be rewritten without her. And now, nearly 30 years later, her warning has become a reckoning. There is a moment that many close to Diana have recalled, where she is said to have looked at a photo of Camilla and whispered, "She's won, hasn't she?" It wasn't said with rage. It was said with resignation. And now, with Camilla officially crowned queen consort beside King Charles, that moment feels prophetic. The question that remains is not whether Charles lied. He did. It is not whether Camilla was rebranded. She was. The question is, what happens to a legacy when its promises are erased? Diana's supporters argue that the monarchy must reckon with this breach. That if it is to modernize, it cannot do so by whitewashing its past. That the very institution which sought to silence Diana in life must now confront her voice in death. Because words matter. Promises matter. Especially when they are made to someone who had already been asked to sacrifice everything. It began with whispers. A glance too long at a polo match. A rumor buried between the lines of a society column. A name that kept surfacing when Diana's tears couldn't be explained and Charles's coldness couldn't be hidden. Camilla Parker Bowles was once the woman the palace hoped the public would forget. An inconvenient footnote in Charles and Diana's story. The other woman. The one who smiled quietly from the wings while the cameras focused on the royal bride. But what began as silence evolved into presence. What began as a whisper became a name spoken without apology. And what once seemed impossible, unthinkable, even, has now become royal reality. Camilla is no longer the woman hidden behind palace gates. She is queen consort, crowned beside a king. Accepted by the institution that once kept her in the shadows. Embraced by a public that, for decades, vilified her. Her ascent wasn't dramatic or defiant. It was methodical, calculated, patient, just as Diana feared. Diana's letter to Princess and wasn't simply a venting of grief, it was a political prediction. A warning that Camilla, the woman she believed had never truly left her husband's side, would not just remain in the picture but would be elevated, praised, and eventually crowned. And that's exactly what happened. Camilla's journey from mistress to monarch is not just a personal transformation. It's a masterclass in royal image control. Because while the royal family publicly supported Diana in the early years of her marriage, they never truly severed ties with Camilla. She remained a constant presence in Charles's life, even after Diana's public revelations and their eventual divorce. She was kept out of view but never far from reach. After Diana's death in 1997, the royal family faced a reckoning. Public grief erupted into fury. The Queen's silence was condemned. Charles's reputation suffered. And Camilla, the woman many held responsible for Diana's sadness, was viewed with contempt. But in that moment of crisis, the groundwork for Camilla's reinvention was quietly laid. First came the withdrawal. Camilla all but disappeared from the public eye in the months following Diana's death. The palace knew the public wouldn't accept her then. It was too raw, too soon. So she waited. And while she waited, palace advisors crafted a strategy. It wasn't just about hiding Camilla, it was about reshaping her. Over time, Camilla began to re-enter the public sphere. First as Charles's longtime friend, then as his companion, and eventually his partner. By 1999, they were photographed leaving the Ritz together. A small moment, but a symbolic one. For the first time, they were a couple in the public eye. The reaction was mixed. Some jeered. Others shrugged. But the seed was planted. The palace, always careful, never rushed the rebranding. Camilla's appearances were limited to charity work and small-scale events. She was not allowed to overshadow Charles or draw attention to their past. Every public step was measured, deliberate. A gradual campaign to replace memory with familiarity. In 2005, the pair married in a civil ceremony. It was a quiet affair compared to Charles's first wedding. No grand church bells. No sweeping balcony kiss. Just a subdued, mature acknowledgement of a long-standing relationship. At the time, Buckingham Palace announced that Camilla would not become queen but would instead be known as Princess Consort. That statement was seen as a compromise, a nod to Diana's enduring place in the public heart and a way to keep Republican critics at bay. But that title, Princess Consort, was always a placeholder. Years passed. Camilla's reputation softened. The same press that once vilified her began to refer to her as warm, witty, and supportive. Royal watchers noted her loyalty to Charles and her increasing presence at public engagements. Slowly, she became a fixture. Not the intruder Diana once described, but a partner. A part of the firm. The pivot came in the 2010s. Camilla's charitable work gained attention. She championed causes like literacy, domestic violence awareness, and osteoporosis prevention. Royal commentators began framing her not as a scandalous figure, but as a modern duchess, a stabilizing influence in Charles's life. Carefully orchestrated interviews emphasized her humility, her love for the countryside, and her devotion to the crown. And then, in 2022, Queen Elizabeth II gave her blessing. In a message released to mark the 70th anniversary of her accession to the throne, the Queen stated her sincere wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort when Charles became king. That statement, so brief and unassuming, effectively erased the decades of controversy. It was the final seal of approval. The past had been rewritten. Diana's letter, discovered not long after Camilla's coronation, now reads less like a bitter memento and more like a warning unheeded. She doesn't need a stage, Diana wrote. The palace will build it for her when the time is right. And they did. The crown Camilla wears today is not simply adorned with jewels. It is laced with history, controversy, pain, a legacy built on quiet persistence. She never demanded the crown. She waited for it. She allowed time, public fatigue, and royal machinery to do the work. And while Diana fought for love, truth, and dignity, Camilla waited behind closed doors. Always near. Always ready. There's a quote often attributed to Diana, though it's never been fully confirmed. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. That quote became iconic, an encapsulation of her struggle. But with Camilla now seated beside King Charles, that crowding has reached its conclusion. The third person is no longer in the wings. She's on the throne. What makes this rise so haunting is the silence that surrounded it. Camilla never gave a tell-all interview. Never defended herself against Diana's words. Never once expressed public remorse or confrontation. She did not fight with the media, she outlasted them. And in that silence, she became something Diana never had the luxury of becoming, palatable. The world moved on. Or at least, that's what the palace hoped. But with Diana's letter now in public hands, the world is being forced to remember. To re-examine the path Camilla took. Not to smear her or diminish her work, but to ask a deeper question. Was this rise built on redemption or erasure? Because while the institution has worked tirelessly to rewrite Camilla's role, it cannot undo the words Diana wrote. And those words have power. Not just because they were true, but because they were spoken when no one else dared. Camilla's rise may be complete. The crown may rest on her head. But in the quiet spaces of royal history, Diana's voice still echoes. And it asks the question no title can ever fully silence. At what cost? It is no coincidence that Princess Diana's letter to Princess Anne remained hidden for nearly 3 decades. In a family known for its obsessive control of information, it should come as no surprise that such a document, a direct indictment of Prince Charles, a damning prophecy about Camilla, and a declaration of institutional betrayal, was buried with great urgency. And yet, the real question is not why the letter was hidden. It is who buried it, and what lengths were taken to keep it away from public scrutiny. The British monarchy has always operated with a level of secrecy more appropriate to intelligence agencies than ceremonial figureheads. For every public event choreographed for cameras, there is a hidden mechanism churning behind palace walls: PR advisors, legal teams, private secretaries, and crisis managers, all tasked with one goal: protect the crown at all costs. And in the case of Diana's letter, all evidence points to a coordinated decision at the highest levels to suppress, conceal, and eventually forget the words she wrote. According to sources close to the royal household, the letter was first discovered by a member of Princess Anne's personal staff in the months following Diana's death in 1997. At the time, the royal family was already under unprecedented scrutiny for its handling of the tragedy. Public trust was plummeting. The Queen had been criticized for remaining at Balmoral. The nation was grieving. The last thing the monarchy could afford was another scandal, especially one that validated Diana's long-standing accusations. The staffer who found the letter, according to these insiders, quietly passed it up the chain of command. Within days, it reached a senior advisor to then Prince Charles, who made an immediate call to the Lord Chamberlain's office. From there, the letter was removed from Anne's estate and placed under classified royal correspondence. It was not destroyed. That, perhaps, would have been too risky. But it was locked away, misfiled, and buried in a royal archive where few outside the institution would think to look. This discovery aligns with a well-documented pattern of information suppression by the royal family. Over the years, private letters, tapes, and journals written by Diana have either mysteriously vanished or been deemed too sensitive for public release. Her personal recordings for Andrew Morton's biography were smuggled out of Kensington Palace under strict secrecy. Some of her conversations with Paul Burrell remain sealed in legal vaults, and certain letters she sent to friends and allies have been quietly removed from public archives. But Diana's letter to Anne was different. It was not meant for the media. It was not part of a book deal or an interview strategy. It was personal, private, raw. And that's precisely what made it dangerous. Because unlike the taped interviews or public statements, this letter wasn't crafted for impact. It was written in truth. A truth the palace could not refute, spin, or reframe. The question then becomes, who knew? Who, among the senior royals and their teams, was aware of the letter's contents? Who signed off on its suppression? And why didn't Princess Anne come forward? Theories abound. Some believe, and ever the dutiful royal, honored the unwritten code of silence that governs all things within the firm. Her reputation for loyalty to the Queen and commitment to the institution is legendary. Even if she disagreed with Charles or sympathized with Diana, she would not have defied the collective decision to suppress something so explosive. Others suggest, and may have been pressured, quietly but forcefully, by senior courtiers to relinquish the letter. A quiet word from the Queen, a subtle warning from the Lord Chamberlain. A veiled reminder that family must always come before scandal, and perhaps facing the potential damage to the monarchy and complied. There is also the possibility that Charles himself intervened. The man who once promised Diana that Camilla would never wear the crown had the most to lose from that letter's contents. If it had become public in the late 90s or early 2000s, it could have derailed his long-term plans with Camilla. His marriage, his public rehabilitation, and his eventual path to the throne would have all been thrown into question. It is not unreasonable to believe that he or his advisors made every effort to ensure the letter disappeared. Royal insiders point to a pattern of strategic information control during this era. In the years following Diana's death, Charles launched a quiet but aggressive campaign to repair his public image. He increased his charitable visibility, leaned heavily into environmental causes, and used palace media offices to counteract lingering hostility. Behind the scenes, aides worked to rewrite the narrative, transforming Charles from aloof husband to misunderstood future king. The letter would have shattered that progress. It would have reminded the world that Diana didn't just suffer, she warned. That she wasn't just brokenhearted, she was silenced. And so, it was hidden. But secrets have a shelf life. And no matter how tightly guarded the royal archives may be, people talk. Staff leave. Files are misplaced. And over time, the truth begins to leak through the cracks. The letter re-emerged during a private estate sale of a deceased palace aide in early 2025. The aide, who served under Princess and staff in the late 90s, had kept a personal collection of royal memorabilia and correspondence. Most of it was innocuous: Christmas cards, handwritten notes, invitations. But buried in a folder marked confidential, the letter was found. It was sold discreetly to a private collector who, upon realizing its content, handed it over to a major UK newspaper. And just like that, Diana's words were in the public domain. The palace's response was telling. Immediate silence. No statement. No denial. Just a closed-door meeting among senior aides and a sudden increase in legal correspondence to the press. When asked for comment, Buckingham Palace issued the same phrase they use when scandal erupts. We do not comment on private correspondence. But it's not the comment that matters. It's the fact that they didn't deny its authenticity. Because they can't. The handwriting is Diana's. The references are specific. The timeline is accurate. The emotions are raw and familiar to anyone who has studied her life. And so, the question becomes, how many other letters are there? How many other truths did Diana write down, only to be hidden away by a family desperate to preserve its image? And how many more secrets remain buried within the walls of Windsor, Balmoral, and Clarence House? For a monarchy built on tradition, image, and control, Diana's letter is not just a breach of privacy, it is a threat to the very machinery that governs them. It reminds the world that behind the tiaras and pageantry lies a family not unlike any other, full of conflict, fear, ambition, and silence. Only this family controls a country. And now, one of their buried secrets has returned. It started quietly, as these things often do. A cryptic tweet from a journalist known for breaking royal scoops. Just a few lines, enough to stir curiosity but not confirmation. Something big is coming. A letter. A name. A prediction that came true. #royal family. Within minutes, speculation swirled. Was it about Harry? William? Had someone spoken out? Was Meghan involved? No one guessed it would be Diana. No one imagined a letter penned decades ago would emerge like a ghost pulling the curtain back on a carefully protected past. But the next morning, everything changed. One of Britain's most respected national newspapers published a front-page bombshell, a scan of the handwritten letter. At first, it seemed impossible. There it was, in Diana's unmistakable hand, flourished letters, elegant and emotional, addressed to Anne, dated, and then the sentence that would break through the fog of royal spin. Mark my words, and one day she will wear the crown, no matter what Charles swore to me. The internet erupted. Within hours, the letter had been translated into multiple languages and was trending in the UK, US, Canada, Australia, and across Europe. Social media became a wildfire of reaction, outrage, vindication, and disbelief. On Twitter, hashtags like #DianaKnew, #CamillaCrowned, and #RoyalBetrayal trended for days. Thousands of users began sharing old videos of Diana's interviews, her most iconic quotes, and photos of her from happier times, almost as if collectively trying to resurrect her legacy in real time. On TikTok, a new generation of users, many of whom hadn't even been born when Diana died, discovered her story all over again. Side-by-side comparisons were posted, Diana's letter next to Camilla's coronation photos. Videos of royal fans crying. Teenagers reading the letter aloud and pausing to process the magnitude of what they were reading. It wasn't just a royal story anymore. It was a cultural reckoning. News outlets scrambled to cover the unfolding chaos. Morning shows cleared their schedules to bring in royal experts, historians, and former palace staff. Every anchor in every major newsroom seemed to begin with the same line. This morning, a letter written by Princess Diana has changed everything. International media followed suit. In France, where Diana died, television anchors revisited the tragedy through a new lens. In the US, commentators speculated on the monarchy's stability and whether William or Harry would respond. In Australia and Canada, former Commonwealth strongholds, debate reignited over whether the monarchy should still hold symbolic power in their nations. But perhaps the most emotional responses came not from politicians or journalists, but from the public. People who had grieved Diana decades earlier found themselves reliving that loss, this time with the raw understanding that her final warnings were not hysteria, as once claimed, but horrifyingly accurate. Others, who had been indifferent to the royals, now saw the institution as something darker, an empire that tried to erase the pain of a woman whose only sin was loving deeply and asking for honesty in return. One man, a florist in London who remembered leaving lilies outside Kensington Palace in 1997, was interviewed live on the BBC. With tears in his eyes, he said, they called her unstable. They said she was dramatic. But this proved she was right all along. Across social media platforms, comparisons began to form. Diana's letter became part of a broader narrative about silenced women, power, and manipulation. Commentators drew connections between Diana's experience and more modern movements. Women forced out of powerful institutions, gaslight by the systems they tried to challenge. The royal family, once a subject of fascination and tradition, was now framed by many as a cautionary tale. But not everyone was sympathetic. A significant portion of royal loyalists pushed back, calling the letter's leak an invasion of privacy. They insisted that dragging Camilla's name through the mud decades later was unfair and counterproductive. Some defended Charles, arguing that people change and that no one should be judged by old promises made in emotional distress. Royal pundits warned that reopening Diana's wounds was dangerous, that it could deepen the family rift, divide the public, and undermine the institution at a time when the monarchy was already facing modern scrutiny. Palace insiders, as expected, refused to comment. Not a single senior royal issued a public statement. No press release was shared. No interviews given. The silence was deafening and strategic. This was not the sort of story that could be managed by a press secretary or explained away in a news cycle. It was radioactive. The firm knew that any misstep could widen the wound, and so they stayed quiet, hoping that public anger might soften in time. But silence can be just as damning as denial. In the days that followed, protests formed outside key royal landmarks. Small gatherings at Kensington Palace and Clarence House saw crowds holding up signs that read, "Justice for Diana," and "She warned us." Petitions began to circulate online, demanding an apology from King Charles and questioning Camilla's right to wear the title of Queen Consort. Calls grew for a formal investigation into whether other writings by Diana had been suppressed, and if so, by whom. Public trust in the monarchy, already strained in recent years due to various scandals, began to wobble. A poll conducted within 48 hours of the letter's release showed a sharp dip in approval ratings for Charles and Camilla. Younger generations, in particular, expressed dissatisfaction, with nearly 60% of respondents between the ages of 18 and 34 saying they now viewed the monarchy as morally compromised. And while the palace tried to weather the storm in silence, other voices began to emerge. Former royal staff, emboldened by the leak, came forward anonymously. One former footman, speaking to a tabloid under strict confidentiality, claimed that everyone knew about that letter. A former aide to Princess and suggested the document had been intentionally buried, not by Anne herself, but by those above her. Even a retired palace security officer hinted in an interview that documents like that never disappear unless someone wants them to. The pressure began to mount. What had begun as a quiet letter was now a national conversation, a global one. And in the center of it all was Diana, not as a ghost, not as a tabloid figure, but as a mother, a truth-teller, a woman who saw what was coming and tried, in her own desperate way, to stop it. The moment the letter leaked, it didn't just change public opinion. It reframed history. It reminded the world that pain has a voice, even when that voice is gone. That truth, no matter how deeply buried, will claw its way into the light. And that when institutions fail to listen, they invite reckoning. The letter is now on display in a private exhibition, borrowed from the collector who first turned it over to the press. Protected by glass, surrounded by photographs of Diana in her final years, the document draws hundreds of visitors a day. Some come to read her words, others to grieve her anew. Most, simply to stand in the presence of something that finally feels like the truth. Because in that moment, the moment it leaked, the world didn't just remember Diana. It believed her. It began as a whisper in the wind, an old letter, tucked away, never meant to be found. It belonged to the past, to the quiet sorrow of a woman who had seen too much, endured too much, and been ignored too long. But now, that letter has torn open the future. And with it, a question that can no longer be avoided. How does a monarchy survive the truth of the one woman it tried so hard to forget? Princess Diana's leaked letter has not just reopened wounds, it has redefined a legacy. Her words, once sealed in privacy, now burn through the public conscience. They are not just a cry of heartbreak. They are prophecy, a final testimony, a warning that was ignored, denied, buried, and ultimately fulfilled. And now, those words echo through the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace and across the world. The impact of this revelation has unfolded in waves, emotional, political, and personal. From London to New York, from Sydney to Johannesburg, people are revisiting the very narrative that has defined the modern royal family. The once tidy story of Charles and Camilla's redemption arc is now unraveling at its seams, pulled apart by a voice that refuses to be silenced. Diana's voice. The immediate fallout within the palace is a storm cloaked in silence. No public statement has been issued. No apology. No acknowledgement of the letter's authenticity. And yet, behind closed doors, the pressure is mounting. Courtiers whisper of late-night meetings between King Charles and his advisors, of fraught calls between William and palace aides, of Camilla retreating from public events under the guise of health concerns. King Charles, now faced with a reckoning decades in the making, remains trapped between duty and legacy. To address the letter is to validate it. To ignore it is to insult Diana's memory. The palace has always survived by maintaining control over narrative, but Diana's words, now out in the open, belong to the people. And the people are not staying quiet. Protests have grown. Not violent, not chaotic, but resolute. Peaceful demonstrators gather outside the gates of Kensington and Clarence House daily, holding signs that read, "She warned us, truth for Diana, and no crown for Camilla." The atmosphere is reverent, more vigil than rebellion. But the message is clear: the public has not forgotten. And they are demanding the monarchy face the consequences of the secrets it buried. The media continues to unearth more. Old interviews are being re-aired. Confidential notes written by Diana to friends have surfaced, echoing the sentiments found in her letter to Anne. One particularly powerful passage describes her fear that even in death, I'll be rewritten. That fear is no longer hypothetical. It's unfolding in real time. But with the leak of her letter, the rewrite has been interrupted. The truth has forced its way back into the narrative. And what of Prince William? Publicly, he remains silent. But sources close to Kensington Palace suggest he is deeply shaken. For William, the letter isn't just about Camilla. It's about his mother. Her pain, her voice, her final attempt to preserve dignity not for herself, but for him and Harry. William has spent years walking the tightrope between honoring Diana's legacy and fulfilling royal duty. Now, that balance has become almost impossible to maintain. There are whispers he considered releasing a statement. Something simple, acknowledging the letter, praising his mother's strength, affirming his love for his father, but recognizing the pain Diana endured. But so far, nothing has materialized, and with every passing day of silence, the pressure grows. Prince Harry, now estranged from the royal family, is said to be furious, not only about the letter but about the fact that it was hidden for so long. He has reportedly told friends that this proves everything I ever said about what she endured. It's likely he will speak out, perhaps in an interview, perhaps through a foundation. But Harry's path is no longer bound by protocol. If he chooses to be Diana's voice, no one in the palace can stop him. And what of Camilla? She has retreated from view. Her appearance is cancelled. Her calendar wiped clean. A planned overseas tour postponed. Sources suggest she is struggling. Emotionally, politically, and personally. For years, she worked tirelessly to rehabilitate her image. She stayed silent, did the work, showed up, endured the glares and whispers. But now, with one letter, the entire structure of that work is shaking. This isn't just a public relations crisis. It's an existential one. For decades, the monarchy has survived on myth, on image, on continuity. Diana's letter is not just a threat to individual reputations, it is a threat to the illusion of infallibility. If one woman could see so clearly through the fog of royalty, what else did she see? What else was hidden? There is now a growing call for the royal archives to be opened, for Diana's other letters, recordings, and documents to be released, for a formal investigation into how her correspondence was handled after her death. Members of Parliament have begun discussing the issue.